Welcome. My name is Nat. This is Exceptional Individuals, and this is our Thursdays webinars. And we teach educational content completely for free as part of our social mission. We are neurodivergent ourselves, myself included, and we have been doing a deep dive into the biological foundations of autism recently. This webinar was really popular. Unfortunately, I got really sick. I had to postpone it. This is why it was much later and a little bit random if you've been attending our previous ones. Like, it doesn't link in. But hopefully it will still be really useful. Yes, and a big shout out to April today, who always helps record and edits all of our stuff. You can check it out online afterwards, because I appreciate it's a lot of content. If you want to know how do we create these sessions, what we aim to do is take really complex subjects and make them nice and digestible for everyone. We do not dumb down content. All we do is word it and change it so it's more accessible and sounds a little bit more human language, because reading those papers, I tell you, it's not a walk in the park. Neurodiverse children, also a neurodivergent, and I study neuropsychology. Michaela, I think today will be very useful for you as well. Some of these things you may already know, but we are going to be coming at it from a different perspective. Just to see how we are breaking down today, we are going to be looking at some old school theory and practice just to set the foundation, and then we're going to be moving into the modern age. Just in case you're like, why is he focusing on this stuff? Today, we are predominantly going to be looking at this from, say, a dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, ADHD lens, but actually there's more of a focus on dyscalculia today, just because I think it's often left out a lot. I thought it'd be a good one to use as our test subject, kinda. Here's a picture of myself in a suit, no, in a shirt. It actually wasn't my shirt. I got said, hey, Nat, do you want to go on TV? You got 5 minutes to get here. I quickly borrowed our CEO's shirt. It wasn't ironed and it smelled. Fun fact. But I am an expert in what I do, apparently. I train neurodiverse people every single day. I have a master's in neuroscience and I'm ND. Any questions you have, feel free to ask. It's a safe, comfortable place. That being said, I am not a doctor. If that you do have any medical advice, I would obviously recommend go to your GP. Here's our great team. Today, you've got myself in the chat, you've got April, and you also have Izzy, who I promise I'll update as soon as I get a new pick. Our last one we did was Autism Neuroimaging. This was a fun one. We were like, okay, let's face it, this isn't just an autistic thing. Most people do not like their heads being chopped up. Just a fact. How can we look at the brain without slicing and dicing? Well, there's some gadgets and gizmos that can actually look. And this is what we checked out. Do check out our YouTube channel. And you look, there's someone having their head sliced open right there. As you can see, there's lots of interesting things about understanding the brain. And I would say just check out our YouTube channel. Just type in Exceptional Individuals and it should come up. Teaching neurodivergent students. This obviously is going to be useful for teachers, but more for anyone who is neurodivergent or have neurodiverse kids. We aren't going to go down the route that you probably were expecting today. You were probably expecting techniques, but we're probably going to go from a bit more of a science perspective, just because the other stuff has been tried and tested many times before. Be open-minded is all I say, but hopefully you will still find some real use from it. What we are hopefully going to look at, if successful, is psychology in education. What do those brainiacs say? What is the correct way to teach a child? And more importantly, does that differ if you are neurodivergent? We're going to be looking at dyscalculia and dyslexia research as our case study today. What is the best way to support people who have a neurodevelopmental condition, a condition that formed very early on in life, either in the womb or at the very beginning? And we're also going to be looking at those pesky neuromyths. We've talked a lot about neuromyths in the past. These are pre-held ideas that are actually factually wrong, but our teachers believe them and they are teaching them and they are influenced their teaching practicing. If we were to get rid of these myths, it would help a long way. Let's take a look at the good old didactic method. What is a didactic method? It is an OG approach. This is your old school teacher. This is your Edna Krabappel with a bit of chalk writing down and you are watching what she is writing. It's essentially you are learning via hearing dictation. A little bit what I'm doing, but different because I'm actually asking for interaction. This is not a didactic method. But obviously, there are elements of it. And we also got learning by observing. I probably hear you cry. I was at school and I hated doing this. This is the standard approach. And it is still the standard approach used today. But we are going to be looking at whether or not this is the best approach, or is this just the approach we happen to use? It's a teacher-led approach focusing on lecturing and demonstrating for students. Then, good old John Watson came along, the father of behaviour from the 1930s. Oh, what a ledge. He had very strong views, and this is a direct quote from the horse himself. "Give me a dozen healthy infants." Not what I would have on my Christmas list. "I guarantee to take anyone at random and train him to become any type of specialists I might select, regardless of his talents, parentage, tendencies, abilities, vocations, and race of his ancestors." What old John is saying here is nature v nurture. Nah, it's all about nurture. It's about you could train anyone to be great. Doesn't matter if you have dyslexia, dyspraxia, if you're more likely to struggle early on. With the right support, mentoring, and coaching, anyone can be a genius. And this was the start of that. There are various factors that they believe that you need in order to be a successful learner. First of all, cognition. What is learning? It's about knowing things, it's about how you remember things, it's about understanding what you've been learning, and it's being about solving problems. You need all of these in order for that learning to really sink in. Then you've got about the drive. Are you even motivated to learn? If you couldn't give a diddly squat about what they are teaching, it doesn't matter. You are not going to be able to absorb that information. You've got to be stimulated. You've got to be in the right moods. You've got to feel psychologically safe. And the last thing is the social. Do you have good relationships with your peers? If you are being bullied, if you don't like your teacher, it's going to be difficult. How about the collaboration side? Are you able to work with your peers to appreciate each other's strengths and weaknesses and work together rather than against? We've also got to look at gender, knowing that there are gender differences and we do treat and diagnose and understand gender differently. What about class? Just because you come from an economically disadvantaged background shouldn't mean that you have access to less support available. This is what we want. If we are able to nail all of these down, we've got a good teaching method. We don't have this at the moment. Seems basic, but only one or two of these things have to not really be in practice, and we're going to have a bad time. There are some models that are quite conflicting with each other. You've got Piaget and Vygotsky. I put the little things how to read it there, but I knew I'd still get it wrong. These have their models of learning, but these models of learning, they're contradicting, and I don't think either one is necessarily bad, but they are different. They're saying learning goes beyond just understanding. It includes grasping, concept, and social context. Interactivity is crucial, and current models see children at active learning. There are things they both agree on. They weren't completely at odds. But I'm interested for you to listen to what I'm saying and to ask yourself the question, what model do we currently use? What model do you think would be better for neurodivergent students? So let's start off with good old Gene. Play is crucial in terms of creating anything new. He was very hands-on. He saw children as little scientists. Let them learn on their own. Give them a couple of bits of Lego. They're going to have a great time. They'll teach everything they need to know. He believed in social learning, getting a load of children together and letting them solve problems. He didn't like adults controlling the situation. Wasn't a big fan of the, hey, I'm the expert, you listen to me. It's like, they've got this covered. It's programmed in their brain. Given the right space and environment, they will learn. Neo just means new. His new method was centered around teamwork and learning by exploration. That's quite good. I like the idea of running around. But I'm curious to know your thoughts. Do you think experts, who need them, just give the right environment? Polarizing to his views was Lev. Levy, what a child can do with assistance, she will do herself tomorrow. What they're saying here is, I am the teacher, I am the expert, being there, done that, got the t-shirt. If you let me teach your child what I teach them today, they will be independent tomorrow. They believed in positive views on adult guidance in development. Nothing wrong with a cheeky expert here or there being able to guide the youth into tomorrow. He believed in a socialization method, so similar in that regard. He saw childs as active learning. You can see a little bit there. He believed in apprenticeships and peer tutoring, where one was more of an equal level with your peers and you learned collectively. The other one believed in a hierarchy where someone with more experience would teach. I think both of these, they definitely have their merits. I don't think we should throw the baby out with the bathwater, as they say. They both have their place. Which one do we use predominantly? Which one do you think neurodivergent students would better appreciate? Jean or Lev? I'm going to use their first names just because the surnames are a bit of a mouthful. Lorna says Jean. Anyone else? Any other takers? Jean, yeah. Just a real simplified way of remembering is Piaget, self-discovery, peer intervention, Vygotsky, learning with expert help. Most of us say Jean, and let's face it, Jean does sound fun. If you said, like, who would you rather be your babysitter? Jean sounds a lot better, doesn't he? And I think with a lot of teaching styles, we go with Lev's approach. Let's apply the neuroscience. Those are some theories which we currently use. What about the next steps? My question to all of you is, how can neuroscience help neurodivergent learners? So when I say neuroscience, I just mean, how can understanding the brain actually support these learners before we are doing two old geezers who have opinions? Yeah, they've done a bit of research, but ultimately psychology is very much about thought. But let's have a look on the science side. We've got adapting teaching methods for specific neurodivergence. Yep, a nice tailored approach. Who doesn't love that? Allowing teaching methods to evolve. Yeah, we're not teaching dinosaurs anymore. Those T-Rexes, they know enough. What about tomorrow? We aren't really evolving. The education system is a little bit stale. Understanding of the way in which a person specifically learns and therefore understands the way to teach them. I'm seeing a lot of overlap here on knowing the person. Find the most effective routes of education. Help understand where strengths of learning process might lie. Teaching individuals rather than children in general. See, I like that one. It could help understand which areas are working when learning. What do you reckon are the top neuroscience uses in neurodivergent education? So these are things that they're actually doing today, but what do you think shows the most promise? So all you need to do is move them around and rank them in terms of which one you think has the most promise to the least promise. We have helping teachers understand developmental delays. Our teachers, I love you guys, I really do, but no one's teaching in nearly enough detail around these areas. We've got moving beyond diagnosis to educational interventions. I don't give a monkeys if you've got dyslexia or dyspraxia. I want to know exactly how your brain functions and what characteristics that you demonstrate. We also got applying to memory and attention processes, actually understanding how the brain is ticking rather than labels. Looking on here, we're saying most of us have said the most biggest one is moving beyond diagnosis to educational interventions. And I think that's quite useful because let's say teachers, they'll often have a list of which kid has what label, but what beyond that maybe we're lacking. Let's go to our case study today, Dyscalculia and maths in education. Let's face it, most kids do not like maths because it's really difficult and it's very, like the thing with English, if you write in a bit of a quirky way, cool, that's creative writing. If you write very analytical, more biographical. But with maths, you have less of that creative freedom and it's either right or wrong. And the way we teach you is this way, or so you can see why maths can be challenging for any individual, let alone neurodivergence. But when we talk about dyscalculia in particular, what do you think it actually is? Because if none of you have heard of dyscalculia, it normally gets lumped in with dyslexia, but it is its own complete diagnosis. Does it slow down learning of maths, or does it make reading harder? Yeah, bang on the money, it slows maths learning down. It doesn't mean you can't do maths, it just means it takes a lot longer. Quite often due to the way that they teach us, the processes just aren't conducive to our mindset. The reading, more likely to dyslexia. What do we need to do in order to learn maths? And if we understand about what we need to know, that is when we're able to make good amendments. Okay, verbal skills. Believe it or not, there's a lot of verbal skills in maths. People don't often focus on how it's explained. When we got metacognition, if you don't know what that is, our next webinar next week is a real deep dive on metacognition. This is really understanding how the brain understands concepts and things on a real small level. Memory, you've got to be able to retain things. Like in theory, I know my times tables, but honestly, I cannot remember them. Even to this day, I probably don't know more than my twos. The use of rules. Maths is rule-based. If you like breaking the rules and a bit of a rebel, maths in the very early instances of most maths is going to be tough. We've also got problem solving. These are all the skills we need to know in order to be able to comprehend maths. You might have noticed a lot of these overlap with some of the difficulties that a lot of us ND folk often experience. What insights can a bit of neuroscience give us in order to better understand? There's this thing called neurounderstanding. Are these words made up? Maybe, but they make sense. Enhancing sensitivity awareness. This is having a greater understanding about how different people learn and process information. Then you've got neuroprediction, which is predicting future skills with neuroimaging. This is cutting edge. Rather than just doing tests and be like, you're struggling there, aren't you, mate? They'll be able to go and say, okay, you are most likely going to struggle with arithmetic because your brain, you see here, this means that this is not as developed as other peers in your age bracket. This is possible today somewhat. It's just not accessible. And then we've got neurointerventions, guiding interventions by targeting neurocircuitry. What this means is when teachers are learning how best to support students, they are using neuroscience as their foundation. This is how the brain is wired and how it processes information. Let's change our teaching style in order to complement what the science is telling us. We're not really doing that at the moment. Here's a quick one. Which of these symptoms are familiar to those with dyscalculia? This is just to make sure we're all on the same page before I dive deeper into this understanding. We've got, believe it or not, it is actually all of them, even the one where you're like, I don't know. Obviously, not everyone with dyscalculia is going to have all of these, but typically this is what you're going to see. Difficulties with times tables. We talked about memory. Yeah, timetables needs a lot of memories. They also need patterns and rules. Reversing/transposition of numbers. Let's say if I'd said, here's a number line, I want you to imagine 10 to 1 backwards. Because we're changing the pattern which you are most familiar with. And when we often talk about conditions like autism, we often talk about repetition. And all this means is that we like patterns, we like to understand. When those patterns are changed, very difficult. I've got some little goggles around here and they show the world upside down. And it's really, really difficult to navigate the world. You can see everything that you can see but it just looks a little bit different. And it takes quite a while in order for you to adjust. Poor sense direction. You might think, doesn't this sound a little bit like dysgraphia? Well, it also can affect that as well. We've got difficulties with calculators. Yeah, that can be part of it. And poor understanding of confusion of signs. I see a plus, but for some reason I'm seeing a times, or just getting overall a little bit mixed up. There is another, with all these conditions, we give them different names in order to get more exact. And the one we're going to really focus on today is called developmental dyscalculia, because you can get dyscalculia characteristics that aren't developmental. Just to make sure, real clarity, developmental. Is it difficulties with numbers occurring across any ages or abilities, or is it just a school age problem? So yeah, this one is a little bit of a trick question, and I'll tell you why. Because dyscalculia it's neurodevelopmental, meaning it starts early on, it doesn't go away because it's part of who you are, it's part of your DNA. It just means that the way we teach maths, for example, isn't conducive to your brain wiring. However, it is at school when we normally pick it up, when we see that it may be a problem or it is just a thing. But with these things, while we learn coping mechanisms, it is lifelong, and early adolescence has an absolutely instrumental effect on whether or not someone is able to succeed later in life. it really does set the foundations. The next question, and this also relates to neuromyths, the more we know, the more we can support, is do males and females with developmental dyslexia differ? Are they the same or are they a little bit different? Okay, so most people say yeah, we've got some people say no. This one is a trick question because yes and no. The research on the case that do they differ? Well, yes, they differ in terms of how they display themselves visually. From a psychology perspective, yeah, they do differ because how we masking, camouflaging, behavioral needs. But from an internal perspective, maybe not. And the research is very mixed on this. So there isn't a definitive answer, but both could be correct depending on which lens you're looking at. The main reason for gender differences is which of the following. And remember, none of these are necessarily talking about neuroscience. We're talking about psychology here. When we see these differences, what is the main reason that these differences exist? Is it stereotypes, expectations, assessment methods, or teaching practices? Whoa, it's a tie. Stereotypes and expectations. Absolutely. We expect boys to, sometimes we expect them to be worse or better, depending on your culture. There are stereotypes that some are better or worse at maths. Let's say you're a female and people, for whatever reason, they expect you're better at maths. They're less likely to keep an observant eye on you, meaning that you probably will not get your help early on. As we grow, our brain wires are getting stronger and they're getting more set in stone, think concrete setting, and it gets harder to support people the older they get. And this is why we really need to make sure that support is done early on. But just purely observing isn't really cutting it. We do have to look at maybe some neuroimaging. But like I said, is there a difference in male and female? Well, the key challenge here is all of these things. And neuroscience isn't necessarily going to be able to support us with that. It brings us upon the question, if we know understanding whether or not someone might have a developmental difficulty early on is essential, what is the best way in order to assess this? Do we look at a child's performance compared to their own abilities? Or do we compare to a population standard? So if you're like, I'm not really sure what this means. The first one is do you compare it to yourself? How are you compared to your other subjects? If you're pretty good at maths, but really struggling at maths, is that difference the key barrier here? And the other one is all my classmates are doing really well at the moment. Why do I have the lowest score? And currently, it's interesting to be honest, what most of you have said. Typically, we do this. We compare to a populational standards. We'll look at the national average and little Jimmy really struggling. Let's put him in a bottom set. Let's get him a special needs teacher. But another approach is looking at the individual's abilities, because this is taking the power and if you were to ask most of us, why was school rubbish? People called us dumb and stupid. And that comes from comparing us to others. But if we only compare ourselves to ourselves, then we get a more well-rounded, regardless of everyone else, what is your potential? What is the best possible version that you can be? And then looking around that. So you can probably see which one I have a preference for, but it is worth knowing that this is the one that we currently use. So here is again an open question. How do we support neurodivergent students in education? We've talked a lot about how we might recognize it, why there's differences, what's the current problems, but what do we think is the solution? Now, just know, I want you to be creative on this. This is not limited to anything. We could be talking VR, we could be talking video games, we could be talking about scanners. Really think outside of the box here. Money, not an option, at least in our heads. Okay, we've got providing one-to-one support in classroom. Nice. Again, obviously, the brain's going, boop, 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 boop. We don't have enough support staff. Forget about that at the moment. Let's just think about what we need. Allowing fidget toys? Yeah, look at me. I've been fidgeting this entire time. Why not? Teaching through play is always the way to go. Jean would be proud. Movement, allowing them to move around. Yep, our brain isn't great at concentrating. Movement allows to reinvigorate the brain. Breaks allow us to have a pause and to respites. Positive strength-based, looking at what we can do rather than what we can't do. Really understanding the individuals, their preferences, their needs, adapting them to suit them, not the school. I like that. Let the child lead. Yes, you're all fans of Gene here. Lev, forget about Lev. Who's that guy? Use Legos and other tools. Everyone loves a bit of Lego until you step on it. Don't really understand the individuals, their preferences, their need, and adapt to teaching. I love these. These are great. Tailoring teaching/learning and support for individuals, what works for them. Most of us on the same page here. The biggest question is, why aren't we doing it? Celebrate getting stuff wrong. It's how we learn. Yes, Amanda, I love that. Well, getting things wrong is the best way to learn. A safe place to fail is the best place. One of the best ways I've ever learned is going out of my way to fail. The answer, but is there a way you can do it which actually gets the wrong answer, and it can help reinform why the right answer was right overall? Or questioning if there is more than one way of being correct. Having any one page profile visible to any teacher. Yeah, I find this when I support kids with at schools, having a profile about what works for them and their likes and their hobbies really works. If I know a kid likes Marvel, then I have an in point and I can engage on them. For example, is there much crossover between Gene and Montessori? I don't know. I have to come back to you on that, Emma. I didn't spend much time learning that one, but I'll come back. So the last section before we wrap up is overcoming neuromyths. This is a real, we've talked a lot about what we should be doing, but what we're currently doing is damaging. And a neuromyth is pre-held ideas. What are some neuromyths that we've spoken about before? Men and women use different parts of their brains, that there is a male brain and a female brain. No, they're just brains. There's lots of different neuromyths which people believe, and we know they're damaging. But the worst thing is that our educators believe these myths. So let's do a little room check. I want to see what you all believe. Do you think, and just write true or false on this, the left brain or the right brain for learning? So is there a preference? Are we either a right brain learner or a left brain learner? We've got no advantage to learning two languages. Does learning an additional language add any value in terms of how we might pick up information? Or we use 10% of our brain. What we got here? Claire, thank you so much for answering that. Yes, Emma's question, does really bad at this. Yeah, has a lot of overlap. I appreciate you clipping in there. All autistic people are great at math. You're right, Vicky. That is a myth. I can vouch for that. And ND people have learning difficulties. Yes, that's another classic myth. We do not. Let's see what the answers are. False, true, false. Left brain or right brain learning. For those of you who think it's true, don't blame yourself. That's what we keep getting conditioned. Doesn't matter. While the brain does have particular regions which are primarily focused in certain behaviors and processing, our brain has activation in both sides. The way we test the brain in terms of activation is a bit rubbish. It'll give us unrealistic ideas. If you got rid of half the brain, would you still be able to be good at art? No, you need the other side, and vice versa. No advantages to learning two languages. Believe it or not, the science says this is true. They've shown that it doesn't matter. Learning another language isn't going to help you in other areas necessarily. What they found is that if you become an expert in one area, the brain really struggles to make that transferable. FYI, I didn't make up these. These are all done from scientific papers because I was very shocked by this one myself. Or maybe it was a British paper because we don't teach second languages. We're like, let's just say that anyway. I'm not sure I agree on that one, but that's what the evidence is saying. And we use 10% of our brain. That is a complete and utter myth. What do you think the rest of the brain is doing? Just chilling, waiting for X-Men powers to kick in? No, we use the entire brain. It's just, again, the way we used to measure the brain, we would only see a little bit of activation. The whole brain is useful. And if you look at cases of someone help me, the guy who got a massive pole stuck through the eye. Can anyone help me here? I taught this. Okay, he was working at the railroad, did some explosions, big pike went through his eye, and he lost a big part of his brain. Come on, help me out here. Now, the reason I mention that is he was still alive and well, and they showed that even if he lost a little bit of brain, didn't matter. But it did, because he actually became a little bit of a jerk. He lost a lot of his emotions and personality. And they realized that while it might not seem as obvious to begin with, if someone has learned about the part of their brain, every part of the brain does have a purpose.
Phineas Gage.
Yes, Phineas Gage. Thank you, Emma. Yes, Phineas Gage. A really interesting case. And it's A to Z of psychology. I just have terrible memory recall. The next myths is brain training apps boost memory. When you're playing that brain training game on your Nintendo DS, were you actually improving your memory? Action games improve spatial skills. Playing video games, does it help? And Super Mario boosts brain plasticity. What I love about these is, if you can see, there's a mixture. None of us are unanimous. The group is very divided. And these is because these are myths that are ingrained in our subconscious. Yep. So the first one isn't true. These brain training games do not work. It goes similar to the language thing, where you will become an expert at that game, but that hasn't shown no reason to translate to other areas of your life. If you are great at Sudoku, good for you, but it doesn't mean that you'll be good in other areas. Action games improve spatial awareness. Yep. So if your kid is busy playing a first-person shooter game, saying, die, 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 they're actually doing good. Leave them be. I'm joking. Video games, who knows? But hand-eye coordination, they genuinely do help. And Mario, this was a particular study. So they played the game and they noticed that because the brain is problem solving, is using coordination, the brain is very active and firing, and it really does work. When you see people doing speed runs, that is because their brain has formed stronger connections. Louise says, just while we're talking about gaming, is there any science behind being really good at gaming and they're struggling with handwriting? Well, Louise, I personally don't know of any study, but that's really interesting, and I'd be curious to know that too. As Zia said, Zelda 2, yeah, doesn't just have to be Mario, could even be Kirby if you want. Any game could help, but with most things, moderation. This one I think is really interesting. They did a study in 2014 to find what are the most common myths that teachers actively believe and influence their teaching practice because of these beliefs. So on here again, have a look at these and rank them in terms of number 1, every teacher believed in this, or number 4, some do, a lot hopefully don't. All right, it's moving a lot. Okay, let's go with number 1. Education can't fix developmental learning problems. You think that's the most held one? Interesting. I will give you the answers in a minute. What this is saying is, if someone has a developmental condition or neurology, doesn't matter how much you teach them, isn't going to do any benefit. You're wasting your time. The second one, we got sugary drinks reduce children's attention. Let's give them some Red Bull. Let's see how they, probably that one's bad, but Coke or Fizzy, is it going to do anything different? Learning is better in our preferred style. We all have learning styles. You're either a kinesthetic learner or you're a visual learner. Or not drinking enough water shrinks the brain. So let's have a look. Bear in mind, all of these are false, by the way. They're not true, but these are things that people believe. Yeah, I know, shocked face. How common are neuromyths amongst UK teachers? And I honestly think this is really interesting. 93% of teachers believe that we receive information better due to our preferred learning style. That's not true. I want to clarify here, because while we do not have a particular learning style, so you are not a kinesthetic, you aren't an auditory learner, you do, however, have a preference. You may prefer visual learning, but studies have shown that it makes no difference in terms of whether or not you're going to learn. This might be a bit more controversial to some of you. There was a colleague in my team who was like, absolutely, this is not true. But the studies are pretty robust. But obviously, there's always more room. The next one is 57% children are less attentive after sugary drinks. Again, we've done the studies. Not really. They might be a bit more hyperactive, but they are still able to learn and process. Again, if you have children, you might disagree with this. I'm not making these up. These are just what the studies found. But even if you don't necessarily agree with the findings, the fact is, it isn't 100% true of what we previously thought. Percent less than 8 glasses of water a day can cause the brain to shrink. No, the brain shrinks a tiny bit, but not enough. If you're not less than 6 glasses of water a day, that's a lot of water. I probably have one a day. I know it's not enough. And 16% developmental learning problems can't be remedied by education. Even though less people believe this, 16% still believe it. Imagine your teacher is one of those 16%. Eek. Yeah, Izzy, you do need more water. I'm not denying that we don't need water. I'm just saying that if you are like really hitting home that your brain is going to absolutely shrink. Brain volume, it's not quite it doesn't affect you as much as I think some teachers believe is what it's trying to say. Coffee count, what the study didn't mention coffee, maybe because they didn't think giving kids coffee was the answer. But yeah, we know that some of the most strongest held beliefs that teachers may have, what do you think is the repercussions on neurodivergent learners? If we do truly believe these things, which evidence has said just isn't true, what happens to the kids? Michaela says, without medication, sugar works, but with medication, it gets worse for my boys. See, that's interesting. And again, everyone is different. So I would hate to use a complete blanket approach, but also sugar is a chemical and it does alter the brain. I think it's about the amount. For instance, schools completely banned fizzy drinks, saying it is the devil's work. Just the science didn't show that. Okay, so if teachers know neuromyths, they struggle in class, or children. I think both people struggle, don't they? They get less quality education. Yep, you're learning the wrong thing. It always reminds me of when I was in science and they would try and teach me things that just weren't true, but they did it in a way to set the foundation to build upon that knowledge. But if you quit education halfway through, you learn some dodgy facts. However, this wasn't the instance here. Forcing children who struggle to confirm their effective learnings. Yeah, if children have a more bespoke way of learning and we are pushing down the wrong facts, it's going to damage them. They're going to resent going to school, absolutely. Teachers believe that their way is the best way and they will not adapt their teaching styles. I think they call it the sunken cost fallacy, where if you have spent your whole life believing in something and then you find out later what you've been teaching or you've known to be true is false, you're like, nah, I'm too far in now. I am doubling down. It goes, if you ever watch on Netflix things about cults, why do people, regardless of knowing the truth, say, no, what I learn is still true? It's because they put so much energy into it. Teachers do not want to be undermined. Their whole job is supporting people. If they find out they've been doing something wrong, maybe they'll be reluctant to fully acknowledge that. It's a very human condition, not just on teachers. Again, I love the work you're doing. Neurodiverse learners will also believe the myth. Yes, and then it continues, doesn't it? It ripples through time. Demotivated, frustrated, reluctant. Or we've got some teachers that ND children instead of looking at their teaching styles. Yeah, putting the emphasis on the student for not being able to learn rather than the teacher for not knowing how to teach that student. ND learners might be discouraged from achieving higher education. Yeah, and that's when we're like this idea that neurodiverse people are entry-level jobs or unemployed. It comes from that original beginning. It's happened here. Can we have some references for these challenges to what teacher training teaches? You know, I'm working with Nottingham University at the moment to do some research on looking at the PGCE, the teacher's qualification, and looking at what they're actually taught. At the moment, very, very little is done on neurodiversity. I don't know if I have a comprehensive guide because a lot of this is lock and key depending on each university, but you can see the general themes. When teachers believe neuromyths, this is the summary, low expectations can impact performance in assessments. If you can set someone else to fail. If you say something enough, people do believe it. Messages about learning can be internalized and affect performance. If people expect a certain thing of you, so let's say, for example, you've been told that you are a visual learner and someone tries to teach you in an auditory way, but you really believe that you only learn visually, you will only learn visually because you have that mindset. So these myths can have knock-on effects. Or let's say you haven't drunk quite enough water that day or had a sugary drink. You'll be like, I can't do this today. I am not in the prime learning conditions. This can lead neurodiverse individuals to feel less about learning. Well, what we got here? I want to say, this is from Louise, emotions also play a part, as in our teaching doesn't understand that emotional/sensitivity and is often shrugged off as being just a crybaby. Yep, emotional intelligence plays a big part. We obviously haven't focused on that today, so you're definitely right to call that out. Now we're almost there. How do you feel about neuroscience and education joining forces like the event? At the moment, we do not really combine education and neuroscience. So I'm curious to see what your thoughts are. And again, be honest. What we got left if you disagree, right if you agree, collaborate with neuroscience and teachers can assist training. Mostly you think that's true. Behavioral methods are cheaper and more appropriate. No, okay, a lot of you disagree with that. They are cheaper, but maybe not beneficial. Joint endeavors can address educational problems. Most of you agree. Effective innovations have yet been seen. Now, this bottom one is the one I want to focus on. Don't get me wrong, I love a bit of neuroscience. I'd love to see it implemented in education. But does it actually work? There's no answer to that. Well, I'll tell you, we have yet to see a neuroscience finding being implemented effectively in the education system. At the moment, it's very much theoretical. We have not seen it effectively done, or at very, very early stages. While we are very much saying schools are dinosaurs, we also do not want to implement something that we haven't categorically 100% known to be absolutely 100% worthwhile. Because otherwise, aren't we just potentially creating future neuromyths for tomorrow? That was a lot. Any questions about what we said today? Any statements or thoughts? I encourage you to disagree or agree or share additional things, everything you missed out. Yay, Michaela loved that. Alistair Smith has a big impact in the noughties, 2000 to 2010. Thanks, Amanda. Definitely will check that out. That's a lot of talking on my behalf. Brain's all dizzy now. The next one, if any of you are able to attend, is on metacognition. This is taking what we've talked about today and going even deeper down the rabbit hole. If you're a sucker for learning and being able to really master what makes us learn, check it out and you can have a little look. So look, metacognition, what we got here. Unlock better learning, understand the brain and neurodiversity. We got metacognition mysteries. Dive into the realm of metacognition with Nat. That's me. Understanding its profound roles, especially when navigating the waters of neurodiverse learning. Do check it out. I think it'll be a very interesting one. Where can you find a recording? It's on our YouTube. Actually, it's right here, come to think about it. You see our YouTube channel, click the subscribe, love it. And you can see here all our lovely videos. We have a whole heap of them. You can see we've been really doing a deep dive on autism recently, but we have a whole stack of them. Yeah. Yes, Bass, I'm glad you enjoy this way of learning. And the reason is we wanted to learn from all this teaching. Rather than just teach it, practice what we preach. And here's our contact details if any of you want to get in touch. I hope you enjoyed it and you got a few gems out of today. It's been so great having such a great engaged group. And I hope you have a lovely rest of your Thursday and I'll see you next week.